kick this guy off. Welcome everyone to round two of the Quarantine Virtual Insights Conference. For those of you who joined last month's conference, it went great. We had a great attendance, great feedback. So, here we are in still social distancing mode. So we decided to do it again. And that's what today is going to be all about. Got a really great series of presenters and presentations lined up for you. Really excited about getting into this. Here we are, a bunch of insights professionals with an opportunity to get together and talk a little shop. All of the conferences that were scheduled for in person are obviously not available for at least the foreseeable future. So, this is what we have. But thank goodness we have, these types of opportunities. So really excited about kicking off and listening to the presenters that we have. I'm going to spend a few minutes just kind of giving an overview of what to expect today. But I don't plan on talking a whole lot, at least at this point. So, I'm going to pass it off pretty quickly to our first presenter. But a few slides and a few rules that we're going to kind of run through. First thing I want to do is just, give a quick kind of intro of our agenda, who's presenting and, what to expect throughout the day. So what we're doing is a series of webinar presentations. We're going to start every hour on the hour, beginning right now through the end of the day. Starting with first presenter is Fran Guzman from Kraft Heinz. He's going to be talking to us about innovation, lessons and themes from successful CPG launches. He's going to be followed by yours truly. I'm going to be going over a nifty case study that we've done over the past few months here at Accelerant. On the subject of meal delivery service, something that obviously all of us are experiencing quite a bit these days. I'm going to be followed by Margarita Grisales from the Golf Channel. She's going to be talking about SEO on a budget. Then Rodney Dalton from Dine Brands is going to be talking some more insights for innovative product development, followed by Kendra Speed from Dropbox, practically scaling research for maximum impact. Then John from Amazon is going to be talking to us about engaging respondents via email. Then we've got our co-presenters from Sinclair Broadcast Group. Jenny and Kirby are going to be talking about automotive marketing and the impact of COVID-19 on the domestic vehicle production and sales. And then we're going to be batting cleanup, and that's going to be Priscilla McKinney. She's going to close us out with her presentation, People Buy from People, Pandemic or Not. So, kind of a wide swath of subjects. I'm excited about it because it presents, different learning opportunities for different types of researchers. We've got folks joining us from all up and down the spectrum. We've got, market researchers, insights folks, database analytics. We've got corporate, we've got supplier side, agency side, we've got academics and students, and we're all sort of coming together and, talking a little bit about the industry that we live in. Some of our presentations are, specifically geared toward, the conditions that we're in right now with pandemic and stay at home and all of the implications therein. Some are just more general research best practices and expertise that folks are going to be sharing. And I kind of like that, just from a diversification standpoint. We're going to be kind of all over the place, and that's a good thing. We can learn from industries or verticals that are not our own necessarily. But I think what we can all do as researchers and researching users is see the value in what's being shared and how we might apply it to the things we're working on either right now or may have geared up in the future. So before we get into our first presentation, I'm going to go to some very quick, conference ground rules, as it were. This is obviously a remote conference, not in person, but we're going to try to capture the essence as best we can. We're going to try to make this thing, as close to your in-person, hanging out with others kind of conference, right? But I will mention that we're using Zoom and YouTube streaming for this conference. Knock on wood, last conference went really well for us from a tech standpoint, but stuff happens, right? We are at the mercy of the technology. If something craps out, if there are issues, all of our speakers are working remotely these days, and stuff happens. We're all we're all using the same grid right now, and sometimes issues come up. We're going to roll with the punches. We're going to be perfectly fine with that. That's kind of the essence of what we're dealing with here. So if a dog barks, if somebody somebody's kid walks into frame, no big deal. This is what it is, right? That said, and that kind of goes into the second bullet point here, which is just be respectful. I don't really worry about this so much. I think just the group of folks that we have coming together here, we tend to to be respectful, right? But the anonymity of not being in person, not running the risk of bumping into someone in the buffet line at the conference, sometimes gives us license to troll a little bit. Let's try to avoid that. That's not to say that we can't be critical, ask questions. We're talking about researchers here, right? So these are folks that are used to having to defend findings and to talk through implications of what they're doing. But again, be respectful. Last thing is, let's try our best. We're all remote, but let's try to network to the extent possible. So if you're joined in the Zoom conference, we've got a live Q&A, we've got a live chat function. Feel free to use that to talk with us, to talk with the presenters. We'll all try to monitor as best we can and engage throughout the day. We've got a lot of folks that are not joining in the direct Zoom conference that are doing so via like a live stream, YouTube, for example. What we're going to ask also is that folks, try to get onto LinkedIn, to get onto Twitter using the hashtag QVIC2020. Let's use that as kind of in lieu of us being able to shake hands with one another and talk and get to know each other. Let's use this hashtag and these methods to engage. And with that, I'm going to get out of the way and I'm going to hand off to our first speaker, who is Fran Guzman. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to unmute Fran, if you'll bear with me for just a moment. Oh, he's good to go. There we are. All right, so I'm going to stop sharing my own screen. Hopefully. There we go. All right, Fran, you're up. You get to take it away.
Awesome. First thing first, can you guys see my screen and hear me?
Yes and yes.
Success for the day. All right. I'll take the W. Listen, guys, excited to be doing this. I know when Bill reached out, I thought this was a very fun and creative way to not only continue networking with people in the industry, but also just share some knowledge. I think it's a great sense of normalcy, especially everything that we're going through. So, I hope that you enjoy kind of some of the key themes and lessons that I'll be talking about, right? Before kicking off, ideally just want to, I guess, ground you on what this is and how you should be thinking about this. In my mind, this is really more about a innovation framework thought starter. It's something that really started a couple of years back in terms of trying to understand the innovation world and how much emphasis gets put on the unicorn type of innovations, right? Those launches that hit 100 million plus in a couple of years, et cetera. So this is something that somewhat started a couple of years ago, has been refined and developed, and I continue even presenting to my own team internally at Kraft Heinz and my BU. But it's really a qual secondary thematic approach, again, framework. We did a lot of, I did a lot of SME interviews, right? We talk to innovation houses, we talk to prototyping and market testing vendors, the Nielsen Bases of the world, right? A lot of ideation houses and innovation consultants overall, and then also focused on understanding from kind of, the people who've been able to do this successfully in the past 4 to 5 years. So yeah, at the end of the day, I mean, my hope here is that you find this helpful, or at the very least informative, and ideally gets some questions flowing and going from there. Yeah, so without any further, I'll kind of dive into it, and then we'll go from there. So quick about me, I've been doing a lot of research and insights for over 10 years now. I would say that, I've been doing it on the vendor and client side, and I've had stints at GFK, Sonic, Keurig Dr. Pepper, and currently I'm the lead of insights and strategy at Kraft Heinz for our beverages, snacks, and desserts business unit. So that includes our brands like Planters, Jell-O, Capri Sun, Kool-Aid, etc. And for that, I think about past 6 years now, I've been kind of doing that food and beverage space. But again, vendor and client side where I've worked on various CPG outside of just food and beverage. Cool. Yeah, that's about me. And kind of today, my goal is to break this down into a couple of areas that we're going to look at, right? One is the business context of this kind of innovation and the kind of questions that I keep hearing, not only from leadership here, but a lot of the times within the CPG world. Some of the hurdles that are identified, some successful CPG innovation launches overview, kind of one-pagers, and then general learnings at the end of the day. The caveats here, right, this is all learnings, kind of a pre-COVID world and whatever that means. I would argue that ideally a lot of the lessons and themes that we were able to gather from this should ideally endure post-COVID, given of what the true essence of innovation is. But, wanted to throw that caveat out there before getting started. Cool. So, I mean, this is kind of what we'll cover. That's an overview. I guess I will pause for questions, if any, potentially, but if not, I'll just kick in into kind of the overview. Great. So a big part of innovation, I don't know how many of you guys have heard, the fewer, bigger, better. I've been doing this for over 10 years, and fewer, bigger, better has been a guiding principle for innovation, probably at every job I've had, be it on the vendor, client side, et cetera. This is something that we always hear, and it's the desired outcome from a lot of CEOs and leadership across CPG at minimum, right? And a lot of this is really tied to the financial performance of a business. Not only if you're able to do fewer, bigger, better bets, does it help your supply chain, your operations, but your margins, your distribution, et cetera. It streamlines everything when you're focused on, few successful SKUs or innovations that work through. Funny enough, within my current role, one of the big things that they've been adding is profitable and incremental. Because there have been innovations that are very much fewer, bigger, better, but that have led to some financial components, either because of supply chain, manufacturing, et cetera. But I would say that this ideally has been at least the guiding principle that I have seen and heard on innovation for the duration of my career thus far. Funny enough, we also know that consumers are very much open to breakthrough and just innovations in general, right? So we know many of them are, 73% of them considering a new brand in at least one shopping category. Looking at global consumers, one of the things that really helps a lot of CPG companies is that global consumers are actually looking to buy products from familiar brands, right? So if they know and trust your brand already, especially during a world like COVID, it provides an opportunity for innovation because they have that inherent trust in your brand. And lastly, we've seen that brand loyalty continues declining year over year, at least among US consumers when it comes to the CPG world. And we're seeing that across categories for various reasons. One, right, is the highly commoditized areas like peanuts and coffee, et cetera, that are very much more price driven and price structure driven. The rise of private label overall. And then just the inundation of options that consumers now have, right? So consumers are definitely open and willing to try it, and then more so now than ever. However, the big question still becomes that 80 to 90% of the 30,000 plus consumer products that get launched every year actually fail. And I don't think that's news to everyone or to anyone here, but it is something that is a reality that we have to deal with, right? So the big question that always kind of comes out around this, right, is trying to get to the why. A big portion of what we did, again, was talking to a lot of innovation experts that have done this with various CPG companies, the Nielsen Bases, the Mintels of the world, the Gartners of the world, to get an understanding of what are some of the hurdles that come out of the innovation process. And you could really break it up into two thematic aspects of it. One is really the operational hurdles that any company, especially a large CPG, would likely have to deal with. And the other is a very much organizational hurdles that come along the way when trying to accomplish innovation. So I'll dive into those hurdles right now and provide kind of that high level component of it, right? So when we're looking at kind of just the process of innovation and what it looks like, one of the big things that is a big fault of when we're looking at innovation is that it tends to sustain in nature. What do we mean by that? It's basically a lot of the innovation that you see launch is basically improving on current offerings and just a very familiar way. We see that, line extensions is very much a high innovation space, even though we know that that's not necessarily breakthrough. And something that we do see with this whole sustaining in nature is that even when there are just very big breakthrough transformative ideas, they get overlooked. And a lot of the times it's because of either, the fact that different capabilities are required to fill that breakthrough innovation where you're trying to go to. An example that, really falls into this is Harry's shaving or blades, if you guys have heard of them. One of the big things for them is it was a very transformational idea, and they had a very big capability component of investing in a manufacturing brand or in a manufacturing facility, right? What does that mean is like they actually invested capital into buying the factory to be able to produce the product that they need, knowing that this was a very rare and rich opportunity. But I don't know about you guys, but on my end, any CapEx requiring in manufacturing is usually one of the biggest hurdles that we have. So really that innovation of sustaining in nature is really driven not only by organizational components, but also by the world that we work in of the process as a whole. The other thing that really plays a big role in kind of lackluster innovation and kind of as a hurdle for us is really the forces of conformity are extremely strong. And what do we mean by this, right? Established expertise. We do a lot of our validation and vetting of an innovation with an established vendor, either because they're already in our system and we don't have to deal with procurement, or they have a database that we like, or they can do X, Y, Z. We tend to focus on familiar channels, right? Despite the growth of e-com, we know that we have established relationships within grocers or just retailers in general. So let's just focus there. Even though we know that e-com is kind of growth like no tomorrow, especially now during the pandemic, but that's kind of that conformity that we all have to play in. Just, and I tell people the larger the organization, the larger these forces of conformity tend to be. And then the last thing is really about kind of the margin of error that comes from the process of actual breakthrough innovation. So a lot of the times what we end up seeing is that consumers have a lot of potential band-aids that they can use for a nuance, right? So a lot of the solutions that keep being produced and products that keep trying to hit that innovation unicorn status tend to be mediocre in that they sacrifice something of the benefit in order to launch, right? So a few small companies really have the ability to say, we're going to stick through the idea of what it is, and if it's not something that we can produce, we just drop it. Again, that's not usually the case in a lot of corporations. I can tell you from my experience, at least, if we've dedicated enough time to an innovation, and unfortunately it got Frankenstein throughout the process, we still have to launch it just because of so many factors that go into it. But those are very much process-driven overall innovation components that we see from the process that are very much hurdles that we have to deal with when trying to do innovation. And then looking within an organizational component, which is very much tied to the process driven, but I wanted to just flip these two things up. One of them is assuming that risk and uncertainty is inherent. I do, talking to a lot of leaders, especially when it comes to breakthrough innovation or just VPs of marketing or R&D, there's this sense that we'll never know if something's going to hit or not. I don't believe that that's the case. There's a lot of ways to do a lot of testing and iterations. And I'm not talking about, just doing a Nielsen basis, for example. I'm talking about actual prototypes, market testing, feedback, modifications that could come out of that. There's a lot of ways that we can do stage gates and check-ins to make sure that we're actually delivering on the product and minimizing risk along the way. But I do get the sense that from an organizational perspective, a lot of leadership really still thinks that it's just inherent risk and you're just kind of throwing darts at a wall and hoping that something lands, which again, I would argue is not the case. The other aspect is that it fails to resolve a job to be done. And the reason I classify this as a organizational component of it, right, is because from my experience, I've noticed that a lot of the times the brand team, the R&D team, the category team will have, performance metrics that relate to them being able to produce an innovation in, 2020 or 2021. So a lot of the times it's like novel ideas that score very well in a screener idea that keep moving along because it has to hit a metric of innovation, right? But at the end of the day, the products that we're ending up with just don't fit a job to be done, or it's just a trade-off that we have. And then the other big thing that kind of falls under this is it's distorted during the commercialization phase because of conformity or issues that we have. I don't know about you guys, but I've had the situation and experience where we have an idea that goes in, but it comes out very much differently on the other end, either because of capabilities, finances, margins that we had to hit, lack of supplies, availability. There's all these things that go into the commercialization process, and we know that it's a very difficult thing. But because of that, we see that a lot of ideas that will likely have a great potential to succeed end up getting distorted and ended up failing because of that. And then the last thing that has been very big is this question of chicken and the egg. So a lot of the times when these innovations get launched, a lot of brands dedicate a heavy support maybe for year one, but then if it doesn't perform to a certain level or it doesn't meet certain criteria, support either disappears or it's very much minimized. Again, a lot of the conversations here has come about chicken and the egg of like supporting a launch post year one is key to be able to see how well it can potentially perform, giving it time to get into the market, to get trials, to get repeat, to get awareness. And a lot of companies, if it's not an instant hit, end up deciding to not necessarily launch. Great. So with that said, right, looking at those hurdles, understanding that the process has some complexities, that there are organizational barriers and hurdles that need to overcome. Again, we know that it is possible, and it's possible in many various ways. One key way that we know that it's possible is through innovative line extension, right? And I think Oreo Thins is something that we can talk about in understanding that it's still very much the Oreo trademark component, parent brand, but it's very much a line extension, right? And we see that, within year two, got to 235 million overall. Other ways that we can do it is through category revolution, right? I think Tide is probably the poster child for breakthrough innovation. Many of you have heard or read the story, know the case study, right? But at the end of the day, the category leader, the market share leader decided to revolutionize their own category, focused on a pain point that was universal, and really revolutionized the category and created a new product line, right? And reaching that 420 million mark by year three. And then lastly, which I would probably argue is my favorite, is really going into a new category, right? I don't know about you guys, but I was a very fast adopter and transitioner to White Claw when it came out. And you wouldn't be surprised that it hits that $245 million by year three. Again, it created a new category, but definitely much anchored in consumer pain points and solving something in the marketplace. So again, we know that there are these hurdles. We have these organizational, these process hurdles, but we know it's possible. So one of the big questions is, how do we look at these success stories and what can we learn and understand from them, right? So this is actually one of our favorite themes, at least with me and my team, is really about, if I have seen further, is by standing on the shoulders of others. It's actually something that is very prevalent in political science, actually, and which I studied in undergrad. And it basically says, how do we understand where to go and what's the future of knowing of everything that's happened, right? And that's kind of what this exercise is at the end of the day. So when we're looking at the giants, these are brands that, I've evaluated. There's many others that can fit this criteria. But at the end of the day, these brands on here, or these products on here from these brands, were actually able to hit 100 million within 3 years of their launch. And today I'll kind of walk through these 4 as case studies as examples. I've condensed basically 5, 6, 7 slides into a 1-pager per brand to help you guys just get a sense of understanding for this conference. But again, this provides a lot of insights and knowledge in terms of how to go about and really focus on the priorities of the framework for an innovation process. So I'll start with Harry's, right? I don't know how many of you are familiar with Harry's, but they are basically, they came on and took on Gillette, right? So it's a $2.4 billion category, and it was very much a dull category, right? They had a very clear consumer pain point about high quality good razors are very expensive. If any of you have ever bought a Gillette one, I know it seems like I don't use it, but I am a Gillette user like no tomorrow. They are expensive products that, you know, shaving cream and a razor can be anywhere from $25 to $30, right? That pain point in having a good quality razor at an affordable cost was something that definitely resonated across the spectrum. Again, they sold an experience in the adult category, so it was very much to a target audience. Dollar Shave Club already had kind of the up-and-coming millennial affordable target. Here they were going for the practical consumer, again, that focused on good quality at a reasonable price. They turned consumers into advocates. So they gave all their consumers the tools and information to really just be the voice of the brand, right? A lot of social media activation and a lot of even using them within their creative. Emphasized expertise, very much activation, very much experiential marketing, right? But they opened up a barbershop in New York, and at the end of the day, they bought a factory, which again, I think one of the biggest things that needs to be emphasized here is, at least on the manufacturing side and the world that I've been in, doing any form of CapEx investment requires, it's a big gamble, right? And it's usually something that doesn't necessarily get approved. Imagine here, right, if P&G would have been told, or, buy a razor company in Germany, they probably wouldn't have done that process just because of what that looks like. But they knew they were the experts in this place, and that's why they did that. And I think the last big thing, the key driver for success there, was the channel use, right? They leveraged e-com in the subscription model to tap into the category in any way. The subscription model is still a little innate and it had been around, but they definitely took that and said, we don't need the middleman and the retailer. We can do this via e-com, and that also helped along the way with their communications. And something that really just resonates, the thing that we want to, that popped for Harry's was their ability to break through with storytelling, advocating, and just differentiating at shelves. So I don't know about you guys, but anytime I had been going to a Target, the end cap, the end shelf was owned by Harry's. It was very innovative. It was very much retail activation. But then even other communications, right, about the quality of it, the design of it, not being futuristic. It's very much an everyday, well-designed product, right? I tell people to think about the way that Harry's is positioning themselves is almost like the Apple iPhone of cell phones, right? Sleek, simple design that gets the job done at high quality component of it. The other one I wanted to drive through or talk about a little bit was actually Arms & Hammer's Slide, which is a new cat litter that we launched. And what you can see there is that by year 3, it had reached 162 million at launch. And what we see here is obviously very clear consumer pain point, cleaning out the litter box. I think that's just a universal pain point that everyone even knows. They were very much focused on going to an untargeted consumers. So they knew that 47 million households in America, right, had a cat. But not many brands were speaking to these consumers. You know, a lot of the innovation was on more odor protection or some form of line extension. So they really had a free range of talking and communicating with these consumers. And then at the end of the day, they were also able to leverage a very clear brand equity and odor, right? Arm & Hammer, I think, is known as, you know, it's in everyone's fridge for a minimum in terms of odor protection, and it's a strong equity that fits within this category. And the one thing that we want, that I'd love to highlight here is basically the simple communication of the clear benefit. One thing is, you know, the no scraping, no odors, no worries. Very much clear notion of the purpose of this product existing is to basically simplify the weekly process or whatever cadence you use of cleaning the cat litter, right? And I want to show this commercial, and hopefully there's sound, and if there isn't though, I actually love the fact that it still communicates the key message without even being able to hear it. So either way, let's see how we get with the sound. So again, right, one of the big things there, so I'm glad that the sound worked. We'll win there again. But the key benefit here is they're encouraging you to try the new product and switch over because it actually solves the pain point that you've been complaining about the most, right? It's a very clear communication. Secondary and tertiary hierarchies of messaging are there, right, about odor protection, which is their equity and whatnot. But the communication was very clear, concise, and targeted to any cat owner. That is encouraging them to shift this over because it will simplify their life or solve that pain point overall. And I want to go through two more kind of these case studies like I mentioned, right, or one pagers. If I can. Yeah. Oreo Thins, I mentioned a little bit up front, right, but we saw that they were able to hit 235 million by year 2. An awesome thing here about how they were able to do it is a very much clear consumer target. The new consumer was about aging up the brand. So it was really adults who had grown up with Oreo, but were looking for a more sophisticated cookie in the same taste. What does that mean, and where did that need come from, right? We saw the rise of biscottis, of bark thins, of all these categories or this new confection category that came out that was very much sophisticated, more towards the affluent millennial consumer, targeting females as well. So what they ended up doing was they basically were able to turn a very much childhood product and age it up, right, in a sense. The product is very much differentiated in terms of taste and texture, knowing that for people who did grow up with Oreo, that their taste buds and their preferences and what they were consuming had also changed, right? So that's something that they had to land. And interestingly enough, right, to that end, they kept very true and honest to what they were trying to accomplish. And these actual cookies weren't designed to either open or dunk. And, you know, they know that about 50% of their consumers do that, but they weren't trying to target their current consumers. They were trying to age up the brand and go after those more sophisticated Oreo Lapsters users. And then they got the product right. Like this goes back to that notion of risk being inherent, right? It's not. A lot of the times Oreo started with this product in China. They saw how successful it was. Then they also did a lot of prototyping to make sure that they were hitting on those consumer preferences, and also applied their learnings from previous launches, right? So Oreo Thins, for example, launched their 100-calorie Thin Crisps. That wasn't necessarily successful, but it was very much tied to a health and wellness messaging, not necessarily a more sophisticated aging up the brand, right? So I think what they ended up finding out, or my assumption, right, based on knowing the category a little bit, is that Oreo in no way, shape, or form will ever be able to have the health and wellness halo, and it has to stick to what it is. Here, what they're doing is it's not positioned as a health and wellness, even though it does have those benefits of being a thinner cookie. But it's more about a sophisticated experience. So learning and applying that, right? They've done this before. They've been looking at smaller portion. They know that that's the trend, but they have failed in the past because of the proposition not being necessarily there. And looking at their communications again, right? The Oreo you love, now thinner, very much about the crispness of it, the more looking like a cookie, a biscotti, a cracker, versus a cookie. And at the end of the day, though, that also does communicate health and wellness halo without having to talk about it, right? So it's a win-win in that space. Cool. And then the last one I really wanted to talk to you guys was about Devour brand. At the end of the day, the clear pain point here was really about frozen meals are not high quality food that consumers enjoy or that they should be eating. I think a lot of you know that this category really broke off out of convenience and people needing meals quicker. And that's kind of how this frozen meal category blew up, right? They were going after a very specific consumer, a younger single male convenience meal seeker. So what does that mean, right? These are the people, they live alone or with roommates potentially, right? But they're single and they're younger and they want actual filling, good tasting food that ideally is frozen and easy for them to consume, right? They've been dissatisfied what's in the marketplace because of that. What we did see from Devour is that it did have a lot of strong media support, right? It had about $13 million in marketing spend and about 2.5 in retail programming, literally activating at store. So there was a lot of support behind this launch, right? And then one of the things that really worked for them was also looking at breakthrough packaging at shelf. It was really much a unique black packaging, something that made it stand out, especially in the freezer area, that helped drive that success. And again, Devour made the proposition very clear to their target consumers, right? It was a little controversial, as you could imagine, a company like Kraft Heinz buying ad space on Pornhub, right? Like that's just such a complete dichotomy of what you expect a traditional CPG to do. But it was very clear in terms of how they were going about it, what their target was, the humor that they were trying to land, the proposition that they were trying to sell, right? Of it's just really good food that's actually frozen. That you will actually be able to enjoy. Cool. So with that said, right, those are just 4 examples. And again, we've done this for about 8, 9, 10 brands. We keep adding to the list of brands. But at the end of the day, the big exercise here, or what we end up doing, is really just trying to narrow it into kind of the holistic themes of what we're able to see to guide a lot of that innovation. So, very clear, must solve a pain point, right? Like, again, I tell people all the time, it sounds very simple, but it usually gets harder and harder as you go through this process, right? But Devour very much delivers on a product that is hearty and tastes good and good quality food. The pain point of cat owners having to clean out their litter and the mess and the frustration and just how annoying that is a clear pain point that Arm & Hammer is going after. Though that's just key and something that must be a realistic lens that must be put on there. Is it really solving a problem, or is it just putting a Band-Aid on something or creating a nuisance, right? The second aspect of it, it must deliver on expectations, right? It can't cut corners. So what does that mean, right? Arm & Hammer, again, I think a good example for Slide. So, that required a lot of technology, a lot of investment in R&D, and being able to actually deliver on the claim of making that process a lot easier, right? So a lot of the times, at least within larger corporations, from my experience, we usually have, what are the margins on that? How can we cut on that? Is it packaging? Is it R&D? Is it development? So a lot of the times we have to figure out how do we make this fit within the requirements of launching an innovation. That's probably one of the biggest caveats that no matter what, if those cuts or those requirements cut corners and make you not meet expectations, then that's automatic downfall, even though if you're in the profit margins that you need to be, right? Clear consumer target. A lot of the times we breakthrough innovation is asked for, you know, when I was in the soda business, is like, how do we just create breakthrough innovation for soda? It's like, well, who are you trying to go after, right? Like if we're trying to go after younger consumers, it's really about health and wellness drinks and what's different and what's better. You know, if you're looking after 55 plus, like, you know, that has to be the diet category, etc. What I would say, it's more about understanding who you're really trying to solve an issue for. Devour, again, I think a great example, right? They were targeting young men, millennials or a little older that were single. Very specific. It allowed them to understand how to communicate to them, where to communicate to them, etc. Simple, concise, and targeted messaging. Again, Arm & Hammer, right? Look at that. Everything that they were messaging you or telling you about the product was about how easy that was and this problem that it solves. And it says, you should try this out. We recommend it. It won't fail you. And the last thing is really about supporting the launch, right? Look, again, innovation has a lot of chicken and the egg questions when it comes to like media and distribution. But one of the big things that I see happen time and time again is really that support tends to dwindle if it's a lackluster launch. So, you know, they will cut media investment heavily. They will cut distribution and selling components of a new innovation just because it's not hitting that mark. But again, the norm should ideally be, and the framework as you guys are thinking about innovation is, how do I support this launch past year one, and ideally through year two at minimum. Yeah, and that's pretty much it. I think one of the things that I loved from one of the consultants that we talked to in the innovation space, which has stuck with me for a while, is if you have to summarize what is innovation and how do you describe what the innovation process looks like overall, kind of in one phrase, is really the notion that, you know, innovation is simple in terms of the guiding principles and things that we need to do. But it's not easy. And it's not easy really because of the process hurdles, the organizational hurdles, and just what commercialization in general looks like, again, especially at larger CPG companies as we explore those 100 million plus, or 100 million plus innovations as a whole. That is pretty much it. I will try to check if there's any questions on the chat version. But yeah, that's kind of the framework that I want to present to you guys, and opened up for any questions. I guess I'm checking the chat box too.
Hey, Fran, it looks like we had a question from Charles that came through while you were presenting, and he was asking, do you stage gate this process?
Yeah, stage gating is definitely something that we focus on, right? Especially at a large corporation and the commercialization process and what that looks like. And a lot of the times that stage gate decision making is also influenced by a lot of the organizational components that go into it, right? So we might need, we might know that a product is not necessarily hitting something, or there might be some concerns, but it passed the validation stage gate, so we move forward with it, right? But yeah, like any other large corporation, that's something that we work within, and also have to figure out that that is part of the, it's not necessarily part of the organizational hurdles, but that is where a lot of organizational hurdles sit within.
It looks like we had another that just came through. What tools do you use to convince retailers to go forward with your innovation?
One of the biggest things that we're moving towards is actually this notion of market testing and really trying to prove that out. I don't know what your guys' experience is, but everywhere I've worked, right, when you're putting a sales story together, is trying to highlight this is going to drive foot traffic to the aisle, this is going to steal from another aisle, bigger basket. There's these big metrics that we try to show and try to tell a retailer that they are going to be successful if they have this innovation. With that said, though, right, they're also used to seeing 80 to 90% of innovations fail at their retail outlets. So one of the big things that we're really exploring and trying to leverage is actually market test results. We've been able to get very nimble about it, and if you're able to show that it performed very well in a test market, it is likely to perform very well in your store. So that, instead of validate, show me. And again, I think a lot of people are concerned of how expensive that can be, but there's definitely a lot of creative ways that you can do test market components on that validation. And the other aspect of it is trying to move towards system one capabilities that we're exploring, especially even when it comes to CLTs, right? We're testing products to understand how they taste. How do we leverage a lot of system one approaches that are being developed by industry experts around facial recognition, actual how your brain reacts to a food that you're having, exploring all those aspects. But when it comes to retailers, again, it's more about the market test.
So you mentioned the creative ways to go about market testing. Any favorites that you can share?
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, the scrappiest one is usually when we're able to leverage smaller or relations with smaller retailers, right? And that's the easiest in terms of setting up, the hardest in terms of the legwork that needs to be done, right? But there's also a lot of vendors out there that are working in that space that are able to do that, right? One of the vendors that we're having conversations with extensively right now, for example, is Mission Fields, and they specialize in soups to nuts development. So definitely recommend looking at companies like that that do that. But again, it's something that you can easily do yourself with the relationships that your sales team members have at local retailers or smaller retailers, at least at a larger CPG firm, right? That's not the case for smaller brands and what they're trying to do.
And Charles had another follow-up question for us. Have you had success with virtual test markets?
Hopefully, fingers crossed. We're continuing evaluating them. No, right? And the question, here's the big question that always happens as we're looking at these processes and recommending them, right? If we're doing this test market, ideally it should be, my point of view is really that this should be upfront in the innovation process, right? You think that this idea might resonate, and that's when you do the test market, you do some rapid prototyping and just get it out to figure out if it will succeed. If it doesn't, then you know it's not something that you should produce. The way that market tests, at least current capabilities, are falling is we'll do a market test on a product that we already know is commercialized and we might be ready to launch in a couple of months to try to get that information. But the big question comes to, are you really not going to launch a product if it does not succeed the market test because of the processes that we have to follow and the innovation goals and guidelines that we have as a company? So no success in that phase yet, but ideally my goal right now is to try to move it to a different process or a different phase of the innovation process to the upfront versus a validation right now of a sell-in, if that makes any sense.
We've got another coming through. Do you find retailers more willing to accept innovation for online distribution than in-store?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Do you find retailers more willing to accept innovation for online distribution than in-store?
I mean, I think it depends. We haven't necessarily had a lot of those conversations. The e-retail component of it, we've seen a lot of success right now, and there's a lot of appetite for that. But even when it came to our traditional brands, right, you got to think about food and beverage has probably been one of the last ones impacted by e-com and that growth. Granted, I could say that the industry has grown, maybe 8 years worth in the past 8 weeks, kind of given the quarantine. But I would say that they're ideally more flexible with communication and trials and promotions in the e-com space than their actual physical retail shelf space, right? Which is their bread and butter, and that's where the big decisions are made.
Okay. Looks like we have another question from Patricia. She's asking, do you use facial coding in taste testing?
That is something that we're actually currently exploring as we're looking at this renovation for the process, right? And again, it's system one. So the conversation that we're having right now is in doing this process that looks at kind of the brain reaction component of it. People are actually tied up to it. Their facial expression, their sweat response, and their heart rate. And what we've been finding out is actually that, a lot of the times we do traditional CLTs and try to understand and evaluate a product, and consumers are likely to just say, yes, I like this, or no, I don't. What we're finding out that, even though you guys, or I don't think that as a consumer, our bodies react via sweat and heart rate to things that we like, we do at a very micro level. And that's one of the things that we're really exploring as a way to validate this innovation process, because one of our thinkings around this is we are confident that our product could be good, right? Like we can test to that level. So we're not necessarily as concerned with trial. We can drive that with media. We can drive that in any way, shape, or form. The biggest aspect is repeat. And the way that you're likely to repeat something is by how well you like something, desire something, and then how it tastes. But that's very, very early grounds, and one of the big projects that I'm tackling right now, as it falls into that, right, of saying how do we improve the innovation validation process outside of a survey scaling of I like this top 2 box type of approach.
Patricia had a follow-up. How do you handle the chewing interruption within facial coding, or is that not an issue?
That's TBD. Again, it's very much in the early phases of what we have. We're actually planning on testing something once things reopen, and actually also doing a validation like we typically do it at the same time, doing a validation in this space. I'm sure it might be potentially an issue, but I definitely have not gotten down to that level of specificity with this kind of exploration.
Okay. I think we got time for one more. Do you have any recommendations on selling adjacent innovation ideas to leadership, since that is farther from product line?
Recommendations in selling adjacent ideas to leadership? I guess I'm not sure I understand the question.
Charles, how fast?
Okay, so I mean, I'll give you an example, I guess, of nuts business right now, right? One of the things is warehouse snacking versus the nut category. Planters is on there, and one of the things that we also own is cheese balls. I don't know if you guys have heard of Planters cheese balls. They were definitely a fan favorite, but it's an adjacent category and adjacent aisle, but they fall under the same trademark, right? So at the end of the day, leadership always wants to get adjacencies in different aisles and different aisle placement as well. So it's never usually a hurdle to sell that into leadership internally. It's more of a hurdle with the retailers of trying to get incremental space, right? A case and how that can be very successful. I think a case study of that is probably Wonderful Nuts. I think was able to get into the fresh aisle, right, where salads are, because they're a salad topping. So convincing the retailers to do that is more of a hurdle than at least convincing internally leadership, at least from my experience.
Charles is further basically selling ideas farther from core.
Yeah, and I think that also ties to, so internally, right, that ties to our strategy that we have, right? So when you're looking at growth and innovation, how much of it is ideally out of your category and adjacencies, right? Again, I'll give you an example. When we've been talking a lot, one of the things that we were interested in is there an opportunity for a brand like Planters to go into a different aisle? One of the things would be something like, the bars category, right? It's nuts, Kind Bar came out, they did all this, and we're really moving forward and exploring that idea of an adjacency and going through. What we ended up having the conversation around, though, was like, well, what is our growth strategy within nuts and for Planters? And that doesn't really tie to that end, where we need to be ideally more within the nut heavy category or mixtures. So that idea of Planters going into bars, while great and could have some equity and extent, it didn't necessarily align with our internal strategy. With that said, though, we also have, Capri Sun, for example, is another thing. We're really looking at innovating outside of the line extensions and the juice parameters that we have. So internally, it usually just ties to strategy, and that's usually the deciding factor, ideally, right, outside of the organizational politics components that go in.
Okay. And I think that's it for questions. Gives us about 5 minutes for the next presentation, so let's give everybody a chance to grab a cup of coffee, and we'll take a quick break. Fran, thank you so much. This was great. Really appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, thank you, guys. Have a good one.
I'll give you the applause on behalf of everyone else.